Nobody in Maplewood, Ohio paid much attention to the man sleeping behind Chen's kitchen. He was just there, curled against the dumpster, an old military jacket pulled tight around his shoulders, a cardboard flap over his legs. People walked past the alley every single morning. They looked away. But one Tuesday in November, the restaurant owner bent down to throw out the trash and found something tucked inside the man's jacket that changed everything. Something that should not have been there. Something that made her hands go cold. Linda Chen had owned that restaurant for 11 years. She built it after her divorce, when she had $40, 2 kids, and a stubbornness that people around her called foolish. The restaurant was her whole life. She was there before sunrise and left after midnight. She knew every regular by name, every supplier by voice. She thought she knew her corner of the world. She thought she had seen everything the alley behind her kitchen could produce. She was wrong. She was so wrong. His name was Ray. That was all she knew at first. The dishwasher, Marcus, had told her about him a week earlier. Said there was a man sleeping out back, not causing any trouble, just sleeping. Linda had told Marcus to leave him alone. Winter was coming. She wasn't going to send a man into the cold over a parking spot. That was her only thought then. She had no idea. She had absolutely no idea what was sleeping 40 feet from her back door. That Tuesday morning, Linda had gone out early to pull the trash before the truck came. The man, Ray, was still asleep, which was unusual. He was normally gone before 6. She almost turned back inside. Something stopped her. Some pull she couldn't explain. The kind that doesn't come from the mind but from somewhere deeper. She stepped closer. She saw that his breathing was shallow, too shallow. And that was when she noticed the photograph sticking out from the inside of his jacket pocket. It was a small photograph, worn at the edges. The kind people carry for years, not because it's pretty, but because it's the only piece of something left. Linda didn't touch it at first. She just looked. A younger man stood in the photo, smiling wide, his arm around a little girl in a yellow dress. Behind them was a house with a red door, a house Linda recognized. Because that red door, that exact red door with the brass handle shaped like a fish, was the door to her mother's house. She stood very still in that alley for a long time. The trash truck came and went. Marcus called her name from the kitchen door twice. She didn't answer. Her mind was doing something strange, pulling memories up like old boxes from a basement, blowing the dust off, holding them to the light. The little girl in the yellow dress. She knew that dress. Her mother had sewn it. She had worn it at a birthday party when she was 7 years old. And the man smiling beside her had called her Lindy Bird. Ray woke up slowly, the way people do when their body has given up expecting good mornings. He blinked, saw the woman standing over him, and for a moment, his face did something complicated. Fear, then shame, then something that looked almost like relief. Like he had been waiting. Like some part of him had always known this alley behind this restaurant was not an accident. He pushed himself upright and pulled his jacket closed, not quickly enough to hide the photograph. Linda was already staring at it. He went completely still. "Where did you get that picture?" she asked. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. Ray looked down at his jacket. He looked back up at her. His eyes were dark brown, bloodshot at the edges, but underneath all of it there was something sharp. Intelligent. The eyes of a man who had once been something other than this. He didn't answer right away. He pressed his lips together. Then he said, very quietly, "That little girl in the yellow dress, that's you, isn't it?" Linda felt the ground tilt slightly under her feet. She didn't invite him inside right away. She wasn't ready. She went back into the kitchen, stood at the sink with the water running, and breathed. Marcus watched her from across the counter and knew better than to ask. Linda put both hands flat on the stainless steel and closed her eyes. She thought about her father, the man who left when she was 9, the man her mother never talked about after he was gone, the man whose name was Raymond Lee Chen, who everyone had called Ray. She had imagined this meeting her entire life. As a child, she imagined running into him at the grocery store. As a teenager, she imagined him showing up at her school play, sliding into the back row just in time. As a grown woman, after her own marriage fell apart, she had stopped imagining it at all. She had decided he was probably dead, or somewhere warm and comfortable, unbothered, not thinking about her. She went back outside. She had a bowl of congee in her hands, simple, plain, the kind her mother used to make on cold mornings. She set it on the ground in front of him without saying anything. Wei looked at it. His jaw tightened. He looked away like it hurt him, like accepting it cost him something. Then he picked it up and held it with both hands, the steam rising into his face. Linda sat down on the back step and watched him eat. Neither of them said a word for a long time. "How long have you been back here?" she finally asked. Ray swallowed. He stared at the bowl. "About 6 weeks," he said. Linda did the math quietly in her head. 6 weeks. He had been sleeping behind her restaurant for 6 weeks, and she hadn't known. Hadn't noticed. She felt something that wasn't quite anger and wasn't quite grief. Something in between. Something without a clean name. "Why here?" she asked. Ray set the bowl down and looked at her directly for the first time. "Because it's yours," he said. That answer knocked the air out of her. She had expected a practical answer, a familiar neighborhood, a warm dumpster, a lenient alley. Not that. Not because it's yours. She looked at him in the thin winter light, at the lines in his face, at the gray in his stubble, at the way his hands still trembled slightly around the bowl. He had known who she was. He had known for 6 weeks. He had chosen to sleep in the cold behind her building rather than knock on her door. That told her everything about what kind of shame he was carrying. "You could have come inside," she said. She didn't mean it to sound like an accusation. It came out that way. Ray shook his head slowly. "No," he said. I couldn't." Linda pressed her hands together in her lap. "Why not?" He took a long breath. "Because you built something real," he said. "I didn't want to walk into it like I had any right to." The word right landed heavy between them. He said it like a man who had been thinking about rights and the lack of them for a very long time. She asked him where he had been. Not accusingly. Genuinely. The way you ask someone about a wound not to punish them but because you need to understand the shape of it. Ray was quiet for almost a full minute. Then the story started coming out in pieces, the way water moves through a cracked wall. Slow at first, then faster than either of them expected. He had left when Linda was 9. That part she knew. What she didn't know was why. What she didn't know was that leaving had destroyed him just as completely as it had marked her. He had been sick. Not the kind of sick that comes with a diagnosis and a treatment plan and people sitting beside your hospital bed holding your hand. The other kind. The kind that lives in the mind. The kind that, in 1987 in a small Ohio town, nobody talked about and nobody treated, and everyone just called weakness. He had started drinking. He told himself he was leaving to protect them. Linda, her mother, her younger brother, all of them. From watching what he was becoming. He believed that for a long time. He believed it right up until it stopped being something he could believe. Linda listened without interrupting. That was hard for her. She was a woman who ran a kitchen, which meant she was a woman who solved problems in real time, out loud, with her hands moving. Sitting still and silent while her father described the slow wreckage of 30 years was one of the hardest things she had ever done. She kept her eyes on the alley floor. She let him talk. She breathed. She reminded herself that understanding something was not the same as forgiving it, and that she did not have to decide about forgiveness today. He had gotten sober 14 years ago. He said it plainly, without ceremony. 14 years. He had worked construction jobs, then a warehouse, then his back gave out, and the job stopped. He had a room for a while in Cleveland. Then he didn't. He had a sister who helped him for a time. Then she got sick herself. He drifted. He ended up in a shelter in Columbus, then another one in Dayton. He had thought about finding Linda for years. He had looked her up once, found the restaurant, found the address, and then he had done nothing with it for 2 years. What changed? Linda asked. What made you finally come? Ray looked at his hands. They were rough hands, workers' hands, even now. My sister died in March, he said. She was the last person who knew me, the real me. From before. He paused. After she was gone, I realized I was going to die too. And nobody was going to know where I came from. Nobody was going to know I had a daughter. His voice broke on that last word. Just a small break, barely a crack. But Linda heard it. She felt it in her chest, like a stone dropping into water. She didn't cry. She wanted to. The pressure behind her eyes was real and heavy. But she didn't cry, because she needed to stay upright right now. She needed to stay Linda Chen, who ran this kitchen and made decisions and did not fall apart in alleys at 7 in the morning. She stood up. She picked up the empty bowl. She stood there with it in her hands for a moment. Then she said, "Come inside. It's cold." Ray looked up at her. He looked like he might argue. He didn't. He stood up slowly, like his joints were negotiating, and he followed her in. Marcus was the only one in the kitchen when they came through the back door. He looked at Ray, then at Linda, then back at Ray. His expression did not change. Marcus had worked for Linda for 7 years and understood that she operated on a logic that revealed itself eventually, if you waited. He nodded once at Ray like he was a regular who'd come in through the wrong entrance. Ray nodded back. Linda pointed to a stool at the end of the prep counter and said, "Sit." Ray sat. She poured him coffee. Real coffee. He wrapped both hands around the mug and closed his eyes for just a second. She did not call her brother David that morning. She thought about it. David was 41, lived in Cincinnati, and had built his entire adult personality around not needing their father. He coached his son's soccer team. He fixed his own gutters. He was the most self-sufficient person Linda had ever met, and she absolutely knew that self-sufficiency was armor he had built specifically for a wound their father had made. She would call David, but not today. Today she needed to understand what she was dealing with before she handed it to someone else. She let Ray stay in the kitchen for an hour. She put him at the end of the prep counter with coffee and a plate of leftover rice, and asked him nothing more. She worked around him. The morning prep crew came in, Maria, Jonah, young Destiny, who was still in culinary school, and they absorbed this stranger at the counter with the easy adaptability of people who had worked for Linda long enough to know that her kitchen sometimes held unusual things. Nobody asked. Ray ate. He sat very straight, like he was trying to take up as little space as possible. Around 9 o'clock, a regular named Harold came in early for his usual table. Harold was 73, a retired postal worker, and he had the radar of someone who had spent decades reading addresses and faces. He walked past Ray, stopped, walked back, and said, "You look like Linda." Ray looked up. Harold looked between them. "Huh," Harold said, and went to his table and ordered his usual without another word. Linda watched from the kitchen window. Ray stared at the door Harold had come through. His throat moved. He didn't say anything, but he reached into his jacket and touched the photograph. By midday, the lunch rush had pulled Linda completely back into the practical world of orders and timing and whether the duck sauce was too thin. This was how she survived hard things. She worked. She had learned it from her mother, who had survived Ray leaving the same way, who had cried once that Linda knew of, and then had tied her apron and gone back to work and never looked back. Linda was her mother's daughter down to the bone. She moved fast through the kitchen, calling orders, adjusting seasoning, and somewhere in the back of her mind, the morning was being processed in silence. Ray was still there when the rush ended. She hadn't asked him to stay. She hadn't asked him to go. He had moved himself to a corner table near the window, and was sitting with a glass of water, looking out at the street. She watched him for a minute from across the room. He looked smaller in the daylight than he had in the alley. Or maybe it was the opposite. Maybe in the alley, wrapped in that military jacket with the cold around him, he had looked large in the way all damaged things look large up close. In the restaurant, he just looked like an old man, tired and lost. She sat across from him. She had a cup of tea. She put it on the table and looked at him and said, "Tell me about the years you were sober. Tell me something that wasn't falling apart." She needed that. She needed one thing that wasn't wreckage. Ray looked surprised. He thought for a moment. Then, slowly, he told her about a garden he had kept in Cleveland. A small plot behind a community center. Tomatoes, mostly. Some squash. He had won a small prize at a local farmer's market one August. He had a ribbon somewhere in his bag. He still had it. She didn't know why that broke her, of all things. A garden, a ribbon, a man carrying a second-place ribbon for tomatoes through 20 years of homeless shelters and other people's charity and cold alley floors. She excused herself and went to the walk-in cooler and stood in the cold with her hand pressed over her mouth. She stood there for 2 full minutes. She let herself feel it, the sadness, the absurdity, the grief of it. Then she wiped her face with the back of her hand, straightened her jacket, and went back out. She called David at 4 o'clock, after the lunch crew had gone and before the dinner prep started. She sat in her office with the door closed. David answered on the second ring, the way he always did, like a man who never let anything catch him off guard. "Hey, Lynn," he said. She opened her mouth. She closed it again. She tried a second time. "David," she said. "Dad is here." Silence. Long, total silence. Then David said, very quietly, "What do you mean here?" And Linda said, "I mean he's sitting in my restaurant right now. He's been sleeping behind my building for 6 weeks." David didn't come that day. He said he needed time. Linda had expected that. She did not push. She knew her brother, and she knew that his composure was a thing he assembled carefully every morning. And she was not going to demand he unpack it on the phone in the middle of his workday. She told him she would call again tomorrow. She told him Ray wasn't going anywhere. She told him Ray was sorry. And then she stopped herself. She didn't actually know if Ray had said those words. She said, "Just think about it, okay?" David said okay. He didn't say anything else. That evening, Linda called the shelter on Broad Street, the decent one, the one with real beds and a nurse on staff twice a week. She had donated to it for 3 years. She knew the director, a woman named Pat who answered her personal cell even after hours. Linda explained the situation without all of it. Just that she had an elderly man, no fixed address, medical issues unclear, needed placement tonight. Pat said she'd make it work. Linda hung up and went to find Ray. He was still at the corner table. He was asleep, chin to his chest, one hand still around a water glass. She woke him gently. She told him about the shelter. She watched his face move through something, pride, resistance, then exhaustion winning over both. He nodded. She drove him there herself, which was something she had not planned to do. They rode mostly in silence through the dark November streets. At one point, Ray said, "You didn't have to do this." Linda kept her eyes on the road. "I know," she said. He said, "Your mother. She would have done this." Linda's hands tightened on the wheel. "I know," she said again. That was all. That was enough. She went home and sat at her kitchen table for a long time without eating, without turning on the television, without reaching for her phone. Her apartment was quiet, in the way that apartments are quiet when you have spent a whole day being shaken by something and you finally stop moving. She thought about her mother, who had died 4 years ago, who had worked herself to the bone raising 2 kids alone, and who had never once said Ray's name in anger, which was either grace or something harder than grace. And Linda had never known which. She thought her mother would have wanted this. She thought that mattered. David showed up on Saturday. He drove up from Cincinnati in the morning, arrived at the restaurant before it opened, and stood outside in his good coat with his hands in his pockets. Linda saw him through the window and let him stand there for a minute. Not to punish him, just because she understood that standing there was something he needed to do, some preparation she couldn't rush. Then she opened the door, and he came in, and they held each other in the empty restaurant for a long time, neither of them speaking, both of them knowing that something irreversible had started. The meeting between David and Ray happened at a corner table, with Linda sitting between them. She had not planned to sit between them. It just happened, her body moving to the center the way it always did. Restaurant owner, middle child of a fractured family, the woman who kept things running. David was stiff at first, polite in the excruciating way that people are when they are holding something enormous at arm's length. Ray sat very still and let David's silence land on him. He didn't defend himself. He didn't explain. He just sat there and took it. That was the only right thing to do. David asked one question, just one. Did you ever think about us? Ray didn't answer immediately. He pressed one hand flat on the table. He looked at his son, the son who coached soccer, who fixed his own gutters, who had built a whole life out of never needing anyone. He said, every single day, every day for 30 years. I thought about you every day, and I was too broken and too ashamed to be any use to that thought. David stared at him. His jaw worked. He looked out the window. He looked back. He said, okay, just that. Just okay. But his voice cracked saying it. Ray spent 2 more weeks at the shelter on Broad Street. Linda visited every other day. She brought food, always something warm, something from the kitchen, never anything out of a bag. She sat with him for an hour each time. They talked about small things mostly. His garden, her restaurant, the way Ohio winters arrived without apology. Slowly, over those 2 weeks, she started to learn who he actually was. Not who she had needed him to be, or who she had feared he was. He was a man who had failed enormously and paid for it completely. He was also, still, underneath everything, her father. David found him a room in a supported housing building in Columbus. It was a small room, a bed, a window, a shared kitchen down the hall, but it was clean and it was warm and it had a small patch of outdoor space in the back that the building director said residents could plant things in. When Linda told Ray about the garden plot, he went quiet for a long time. Then he said, "Your brother did that?" She nodded. Ray hid his hand over his eyes. His shoulders moved once. Linda looked away and let him have that moment alone. She thought about what healing looked like later that winter, on a slow Tuesday night at the restaurant. She thought it looked different than she'd expected. It wasn't loud. It didn't come with a confession or a ceremony or a speech where someone said all the right words. It came in bowls of congee, carried out to a cold alley. It came in a phone call on a Wednesday afternoon that tore open 30 years in under 3 minutes. It came in a garden plot that a man who left had not earned, but was given anyway, by a son who was stronger than his wound. Ray called the restaurant the following spring. It was a Tuesday morning, early, before the prep crew arrived. Linda answered from the kitchen, the way she always did. He told her the tomatoes were coming in, that the first ones were just starting to turn. He said he wanted to bring her some when they were ready, if that was okay. Linda stood at the sink with the phone against her ear and the empty restaurant around her, and the early light coming through the window. She thought about a little girl in a yellow dress standing in front of a red door. "Yes," she said. "Bring them when they're ready."